Support for Connecticut East this week comes from SCAD, the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, is offering a $3,500 sign-on bonus for licensed clinicians. Go to licensedclinicians.org to learn more. That's licensedclinicians.org. And Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, here to help individuals and families affected by gambling-related harm. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit our website at ccpg.org. It's Thanksgiving, a time to celebrate with family and food, but more often that food is making us sick. We talked to Connecticut author and filmmaker Jeff Benedict about his book and documentary, Poisoned: The Dirty Truth About Your Food. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. It's Thanksgiving, time to celebrate with our families and friends and enjoy some turkey and a myriad of side dishes from mashed potato to green beans and maybe even some healthy salad. But the reality is our food is more often making us sick. And according to the CDC, around 48 million Americans each year get sick from food poisoning. 128,000 end up in the hospital and 3,000 die from foodborne diseases. It seems every other week there are headlines in the media telling us about yet another food recall, from processed meats to, yes, even salad. So although it's a time of celebration, it also seems apt to remind ourselves to look at what we're eating and start asking some serious questions of the agencies that are supposed to be looking out for us. In 2023, Netflix aired a documentary called Poisoned: The Dirty Truth About Your Food, based on the book of the same name by Connecticut author Jeff Benedict. I caught up with Jeff recently to talk about the book, what inspired him to write it, and his thoughts on the Emmy award-winning Poison documentary. Jeff Benedict, New York #1 Times bestselling author, as well as Emmy award-winning television producer and resident of Eastern Connecticut. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, you're probably better known for maybe your sports and athletics books that you've done and also the TV series. But we're talking to you today about a book that you brought out back in 2011, which last year was turned into a Netflix documentary called Poisoned. I suppose the question is, what in 2011 or prior to that caused you to want to write about our food system?
Back in 2011, I wasn't writing about sports figures at all. In fact, I was writing about very different kinds of stories that had nothing to do with sports. They were mainly legal in nature. And America's food system was something that I was interested in, and I was actually trying to figure out a way to do a book about America's food system that was different than some of the other really good books that had already been done. And so I was looking at lawsuits that had been brought against food companies that had made people really sick. And that's what ultimately led me to a lawyer named Bill Marler, who was probably the leading plaintiff's attorney in the United States, maybe in the world, that was suing food companies on behalf of victims. And when I started looking into his history and I saw that his career started with a case back in '92 involving E. coli in hamburgers through Jack in the Box, the more I looked at that case, I realized, wow, this is a great untold story, and at least untold in terms of book length. And so I decided I wanted to write about that particular case because it was Bill Marler's origin story. And that's what set me off on it.
You're quoted as saying writing the book Poisoned and getting it published is one of the hardest things I've done in my career. Why was that?
Because my current publisher at that time and none of my previous publishers in 2011 would offer me a contract to write that book. And that's not the first time that I had pitched a book idea that got rejected. I think most writers have had that experience repeatedly, right? Not every idea is a great one. And usually my response to that is to move on and find another idea. If your idea isn't commercially valuable, then you really have to question why you're doing it. Are you doing it as a hobby or are you doing it for something else? And I'm not in writing as a hobby. And so typically I would say, okay, you have a meeting of the minds with your publisher, with your editor and your agent, and you realize this idea you have probably isn't going to work. Let's just go back to the drawing board. But in this particular story, I was really invested in it. I don't mean financially. I was really invested in it in terms of my enthusiasm for it. And personally, it was just something I was incredibly fascinated by because at the time, my wife and I were living on an organic farm. We had moved to Virginia from New England, where we're from, and we bought an old farm in Virginia and we reactivated it and turned it into an organic produce farm, basically. And we had chickens and goats and all kinds of stuff. And so we were living in an environment where food was just very much on our mind. So I wanted to do this book. And the only way it was going to happen was to figure out a way to self-finance it and self-publish it. And I'd really never had to do that before. So part of this was learning a part of the business as a writer that I hadn't had to know a lot about before. And I'll just say that it was a very valuable experience. And it gave me a much deeper understanding and appreciation for the industry that I'd been in for over a decade.
Fast forward over 10 years later, and it's been turned into a Netflix documentary. You were, I believe, an executive producer on that. Talk to us about that, because that's quite a gap between, obviously, since the book came out. So how much had to be updated? The documentary I've watched, which is a superb documentary, and I would say to anybody who's interested in food should watch it. It still goes back to the roots of the book and obviously covers that original pivotal moment in American food safety with Bill and the E. coli outbreak. But as I say, talk to us about what then had to be updated, because it's still a big problem in this country.
It is. And thank you for the kind words about the film. I agree. I think that the filmmaking team did an amazing job on the documentary, as were the other 4 films that we were up against at the Emmys. I was thrilled that ours actually won for Outstanding Documentary. And that's the credit to the people that worked on this. But the truth is, it wasn't really a matter of updating the book. The fact is, the documentary is so different than the book that you almost don't recognize that the documentary stems from the book. The only thing in the film that's similar to the book is the opening, I would say the first 10 minutes of the film is about what's in the book. It's Phil Marler's origin story and the E. coli outbreak in Seattle in 1992 that gave rise to what's going on in food safety today. The rest of the film is not about the book. It's about what's happening in America right now in our food system. And that was a conscious choice that we all made and we all agreed on was the right choice for a documentary on Netflix. I believed when I wrote the book, one of the things I pitched unsuccessfully to my publishing house was that this book has the makings of a great Hollywood film. It has the characters, it has the drama, it has all the things you need for a great 2-hour movie. And I still feel that way today. In fact, I think now more than ever that the book will become a movie. But when I had the chance to turn it into a documentary for Netflix, I didn't see that as that opportunity. We didn't sell Netflix a motion picture with actors. We sold them a documentary. And I think what Netflix wanted was something current, something informative and educational and revealing about food safety today. And so I thought it was right. And that's actually what's great about a book like this is it can be multiple things. It can be the basis of a documentary, but it can also be the inspiration for a movie. And I think the fact that it became a Emmy-winning documentary only improves and enhances its chances of becoming a motion picture down the road.
You say that the documentary, only about the first 10 to 15 minutes, is very reminiscent of the book. But that said, Bill Maher, the attorney, is throughout the documentary and at the very end makes some very poignant comments. We're not going to give it away because people should, as I say, they should watch it. It is an important modern day piece about the food safety or lack of food safety in this country. How was it like talking to Bill again? Because I'm guessing it was a while since you'd last spoken to him. probably as far back as 2000, whenever the book was being written. So how did he react to this coming back up with all of this with you again as part of that team?
Actually, I talked to Bill regularly. We became best friends, almost like brothers, through the process of me writing the book. That friendship stays today. My wife and I stay in his home with him and Julie when we're in the Seattle area. We talk regularly, both by phone, by text. So I'm in touch with Bill a lot. So it wasn't like that in the sense of reacquainting with him 10 years later. And I didn't do the interviews with him for the documentary. Those were done by Stephanie, the director. The funny thing is, I talk to Bill so regularly. We're more like brothers now. And that's one of the great things about the kind of books that I write is I do form a lot of lasting relationships with subjects, people that start out as strangers that I want to delve into as a writer. And not every time does it result in a long lasting relationship, but often it does. And in Bill's case, that certainly happened. And that actually made it a lot easier for Stephanie and the team to have the kind of access to him that they had. And we ultimately essentially used Bill almost like a narrator. This film doesn't have a narrator per se. We kind of use Bill in that role. He is, in one hand, the sort of the main character of the documentary, but he's also performs a narrative role for us so that the filmmaker doesn't have to do that.
The interesting thing about this documentary is it gives a very unvarnished look at the food system here in the United States and the fact that there's something like 15 different agencies across the nation that have some form of responsibility or no responsibility in certain regards. Two of those organizations which are highlighted in the documentary is the USDA and the FDA, which listeners and viewers will be well acquainted with. What was interesting watching that, and in particular from the USDA's point of view, was how Sandy Eskin, who was the interviewee, and she's the Deputy Undersecretary for the USDA, how belligerent she was about this whole thing. Were you surprised when you saw the footage on that? Because she effectively wiped her hands of really a lot of responsibility. But then later on, we hear Bill saying, as the person in that position, she actually has a lot of power and can actually make a lot of change.
Yeah, I did actually feel that way when I saw the footage of her interview. And I just thought, what a missed opportunity. And also the arrogance and condescension that comes through not only her voice, but her demeanor. And look, I mean, when you're in those positions, you're a public servant, you're a civic servant. Those jobs are so rare. There's so few people that get to serve in positions like that. And when you come across that way, that gives credence to why so many people have a jaded view towards bureaucracy. As you see something like that, you throw your hands up in the air and you go, what's the sense of even hoping that something good could happen? When in fact, she is in a position to make something very positive happen. She has the power to declare salmonella an adulterant in chicken, much the way one of her predecessors did with E. coli in beef. She can do that. The real question is, why won't she do that? And it's embarrassing that on one hand, she makes herself look like she has no power to accomplish or do anything at all. But on the other hand, she comes across like someone who's just above it all, like she doesn't have time to answer these questions. And so pretty disappointing.
What was also interesting in watching the documentary is we all feel that we've got a sense of what makes us ill if we eat things. And certainly the documentary, as I say, highlights the original pivotal case back in the 1990s about contaminated and undercooked hamburger or beef in hamburger. But today's big issue seems to be something which we would all think is perfectly safe, and that's leafy greens, lettuce, and things like that. That was a startling revelation. I will be honest with you. When I decided to watch this, and obviously we agreed to do the interview with you, I thought, oh, here we go. We know what's going to come out of this. I was absolutely, genuinely, as a fellow journalist like yourself, absolutely staggered over this is actually, leafy greens is now the biggest cause of foodborne illness in the country.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought it up because I'm a big proponent, and a lot of this comes from having worked on this project, but a big proponent of trying to buy local and trying to buy in season when it comes to fruits and vegetables. Look, would I love to eat strawberries in the dead of winter? Yes, I would, but not if they came here on trucks from Mexico or Florida. I think that one of the lessons of the leafy green outbreaks is that this is really a result of the current state of agriculture in America, where you have these, what I call factory farms, that are producing leafy greens, and they literally are next door to other factory farms that have thousands of head of cattle on them that are being raised for beef purposes. And there is a merging through water of cow feces and whatnot that gets into the irrigation system of what waters the produce on the next factory farm. And that's really one of the biggest problems. And so I try not to eat romaine lettuce unless I'm buying it by the head and I'm buying it local. And so the real problem is in the bagged leafy greens. It's when you buy it in bags in grocery stores. And I stay away from that. And I used to like that, but I still buy leafy greens and I consume them. But some of them we grow in our own garden. Some of them we buy in the local farmer's market. And so there's grit on it and dirt and all that. And I want that because that's helping me know that it came from nearby.
Another startling revelation in the documentary was the fact that farms effectively not monitored by these state agencies. They don't have any powers until things, when it comes to meat, goes to the slaughterhouse. Again, that was a concern as a consumer, that we hear so many stories about how other industries are monitored for safety. Yet one of the biggest things, our food, is not monitored at the source. And clearly there's a lot of people lobbying as well. It makes a point in the documentary that food lobbyists, and this is one of Connecticut's legislators, said that food lobbyists now are more powerful than consumer lobbyists.
Yeah. That was Representative Rosa DeLaura from New Haven who made that comment. And I think she would know. She's in a position to know that because she is lobbied all the time. And I think that most people, most consumers don't think of food like a commodity. You look at food differently than you do automobiles, gasoline, clothing, all these different forms of commodities. But the food industry views food as a commodity. It's traded on the stock exchange. Everything from the price of grain and wheat to the cost of transporting produce from Salinas Valley in California to the East Coast or whatever. These are bankers and accountants who are figuring these things out. And so there's a tremendous amount of lobbying, and it's a consolidated industry. In other words, like in the beef space, there's basically like 4 big conglomerates that control all of the beef production in the United States. And so there's a consolidation of power, and that's why they can afford to do the lobbying they do. I'll tell you, one of the things that's frustrating to me is that I do think that legislators, and I would include Rosa DeLaura in this because she's been in Congress for as long as she has. I think the legislators have to do more than they do. And they can't just lean on a crutch and say, when the consumers make enough noise, we will act. No, because most consumers don't know. They don't even know what they're supposed to make noise about. You do know because you've been in the legislature for 30 years. You don't need consumers to make noise. How about just doing the right thing? How about just taking advantage of the fact that for 3 decades you've been in office? And maybe you need to do some educating with consumers so that consumers actually know why this is a problem. But for goodness sakes, there ought to be more pressure routinely on the agencies and on getting these kinds of policies and laws put through. I find that frustrating.
Absolutely. And again, the documentary makes it very clear in several circumstances about the fact that it is left to the consumer. In fact, again, just pointing out the USDA said that if you don't want toxic salmonella in your chicken, well, cook it. And it's like, that's not helpful. We shouldn't have to have products in the first place that obviously have those types of pathogens and poisons in them. And also, of course, I think the other point to make is that when people do get maybe a foodborne illness and food poisoning, is they don't always report it. And it's not until it becomes a big thing that becomes nationally reported that obviously the agencies then sort of prick their ears up and start to take notice. Like I said, it is an incredible 1.5 hour journey through the food system here in the US, and the fact that although there have been changes and things are happening, still so much more obviously has to be done. But yeah, to your point that, as you say, legislators need to do more. And hopefully when people watch this, they will get angry about it, really, because none of us can survive without food and water. And here we are, as the documentary says, the dirty truth about your food.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot more that can be done at the legislative level, at the policy level. And it just shouldn't take people being in the hospital for that to happen. Writing this book for me was, from a commercial standpoint, the least lucrative book that I have probably ever done, because I couldn't get a contract for it. But it was one of the most important. By the way, these food problems we're talking about in the United States, it's not like there aren't food safety issues around the world. There are. And so I think one of the things that Netflix was excited about, you'd think, why would Netflix want to buy the rights to a book like this? Because they realize that everybody eats. Like, everybody that's on their platform eats. And so this is something that, if we're lucky, it could take off, it could catch on, and then that is what happened.
It is one of those inconvenient truth documentaries, isn't it? That puts the spotlight fairly and squarely on something that is so pivotal to our own existence as human beings, as you say, the food that we eat. Jeff, it's been absolutely great talking to you. Thanks for taking time out of your day to talk about Poison, the dirty truth about your food. It's still available, obviously, on Netflix. And who knows, as you say, having watched it myself, I can certainly see that being turned into a movie. And let's hope that is the next sort of like vision for this. Thank you for taking time to talk to us. And congratulations to you and the team on the Emmy win for this very important documentary.
Thank you very much.
And if you have Netflix, you can still see the documentary by searching for Poisoned, and Jeff's book of the same name is available on Amazon and at all good bookstores. Connecticut East This Week is made possible by
SCAD, the Southeastern Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, is looking for licensed clinicians and is offering the top benefits packages in the state. Go to licensedclinicians.org to learn more. That's licensedclinicians.org.
The Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling is a nonprofit organization which, through advocacy, prevention, and education, is here to support individuals and families who are impacted by problem gambling. Our helpline, 1-888-789-7777, is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also have live chat and tech support through our website, www.ccpg.org.
Time now for a look at other stories making the headlines this week. State Pier in New London, redeveloped at a cost of $310 million for the offshore wind industry, has identified a soil problem affecting the south end of the pier. Routine soil testing showed an area approximately 100 feet long and exceeding 10 feet in thickness was identified as having excessively silty material that could impact the structural integrity of the area. Paul Whitescarver is the chairman of the Connecticut Port Authority and said they're looking into the issue with their project manager and construction company, Kiewit.
Whenever you're doing construction on these piers, you go back and do some quality assurance checks on areas that were part of the design that we wanted to make sure were correct. And this happens to be on the very end on the south pier, part of the area in between, which was part of the fill. This is between us and Kiewit, but I think they used the correct material. But when we went back to do the quality check, there's some obvious issues that need to be corrected. We're talking to Kiewit on how to do that.
Whitescarver said the issue is not affecting pier operations, but they do need to fix the problem.
If it turns out to be a financial issue, then obviously that's something that would be between us and Kiewit. But I don't think it's going to come to that. I think it'll be easily resolved. There's the engineer of record, there's engineers for Kiewit that are trying to come to a conclusion on how we can remediate it such that it gets done to the specs that were required by design. It's not affecting any part of the pier. It's not affecting any of the operations of the pier, but we owe it to our taxpayers to make sure that we get what we paid for.
A spokesperson for Kiewit acknowledged the soil issue and said they are working with the CPA to remedy the matter, but also said they had supplied soil to the specifications of the CPA contract. Open enrollment for Medicare will close on December 7th, and Connecticut's Office of the Healthcare Advocate is reminding consumers to shop around to make sure their plan still meets their needs. Kathy Holt is the state's acting healthcare advocate and says people need to ask themselves two basic questions.
Has my health insurance, has it changed? Has my own health condition changed? The vast majority of people, statistically, it's 80 to 90%, don't ever look at other insurance options. They immediately just say, I'm going to auto renew. I've been happy with what I had last year. If you can just answer those two questions, make sure that your plan covers your doctors and make sure that your plan covers your prescriptions.
Holt says people on Medicare especially need to pay attention to their current plan, as changes will come next year when the current administration in Washington changes.
One of the things that we're going to have to watch out for is this rapid privatization of the Medicare program to make sure people have choices, that our healthcare can remain strong. And the affordability is critical. The original Medicare program didn't matter if you were the richest person in the United States or the poorest. Everybody got the exact same coverage. There are a lot of changes that have happened over the years with market forces.
Holt says the state has programs for people on Medicare that can help pay premiums dependent on their financial situation, and says around 50% of people who would qualify for those programs don't even know they exist. She says consumers also need to ask their doctor whether they will be staying with their plan's network for the next year. Otherwise, they could find themselves without a doctor mid-term. The Office of the Healthcare Advocate is an independent state agency that provides free and impartial advice for consumers about their healthcare and can act as an advocate when health insurers deny a service or treatment. They can be reached via their website at ct.gov/OHA. As we celebrate Thanksgiving, Connecticut's farmers have been finding out about the future of their industry here in the state at the annual Connecticut Agricultural Expo. The event showcases innovative technology as well as financial programs and state grants that are available to Connecticut's farmers. Paul Larson is the president of the Connecticut Farm Bureau and says one thing the industry is looking for is the next generation of farmers, as the current ones are aging out.
Some of them are not coming from farm family. They don't have any experience in agriculture, but they're interested and they want to pursue a future in agriculture, which is wonderful. Because the reality is, if you're just relying on kids from farm families to continue that farm, it's not going to work. There are just so many other opportunities for young people to pursue these days. Anything that we can do as an organization to promote the fact that a career in agriculture is a viable option for young people, that there are financially rewarding careers, that's key to getting people involved in the future.
Brian Herbert is the commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Agriculture and said there's a lot of changes and challenges coming to the industry in the next few years.
We're going to have a new administration at the federal level. We're going to have a new Secretary of Agriculture. We're going to have a new farm bill. We're going to have a new set of legislators up in Hartford. We're going to have a vastly different budget situation than we've had over the past 5 years. Invite your local state legislators to your farm. Show them what you do, what you produce, how you do it, and help them think about how they can support the growth and expansion of your farm.
Connecticut's agricultural industry generates around $4 billion each year to the state's economy and employs over 31,000 people. Connecticut has around 5,000 farms that produce everything from meat products to dairy to maple syrup that are sold at farmers markets across the state and in local stores and supermarkets. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week. And you can listen to the show again on our social platforms, on demand, and by asking your smart speaker to play Connecticut East This Week podcast. And please like, follow, and share on your social media too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.